Commissioner Olli Rehn, thank you for joining Reuters Davos today. Irish five-year yields are on a par with US Treasury's five-year yields. Surely some irrational exuberance in the Eurozone, no?
It shows that the worst of the crisis in the Eurozone is over, and Ireland has indeed completed its successful exit from the support program of the EU and the IMF. And there has been also some, I would say, positive contagion effect to the other sovereigns in the Eurozone.
Isn't there a risk, though, that we get back into this situation where markets stop pricing risk within the Eurozone and that will lead to complacency?
I think we are quite far from that risk, and I believe that one of the lessons of the crisis we have learned, all have learned, is that indeed it is important to realistically price all assets and all bonds, including sovereign bonds. But I wouldn't say that we are at any kind of irrational stage yet.
Well, now, one of the risks clearly in Europe is of complacency. You met Jack Lew yesterday, American economy roaring ahead at 3% growth this year. The Eurozone's going to really struggle to get to 1%. What can you do to really rev up the engines of the European economy now?
The United States cleaned up its banking sector earlier than the Europeans did, and that's one reason why the US economy has picked up stronger than Europe's. But we are coming along, and we have a fairly decent growth this year, and it's now important that we strengthen the foundations of economic recovery and sustainable growth, so that we can also enhance job creation in Europe, which is the big issue for ordinary Europeans.
Now, you talked about the banking sector. Obviously, much of this year is going to be spent reviewing the quality of banks' assets and stress testing them and so on. Isn't there a risk that that's going to be a lost year in terms of credit to the real economy?
I see it actually the other way around. In fact, these asset quality reviews and stress tests are encouraging the banks and also central banks to push for recapitalization, say already before the AQR results will be known, so that this kind of preemptive recapitalization, and we are seeing this in the process for the moment in Italy, in many other parts of Europe.
But while the banks are doing that, they're not lending.
There are problems in terms of lending to the SMEs, but at the same time, and there are serious problems. I see that the most serious bottleneck to economic growth in Europe is the excessively tight lending conditions to SMEs, especially in Southern Europe.
What can you do to break that bottleneck?
But we cannot break that negative circle by avoiding problems. Instead, we have to tackle the problems of the banks in Europe, the banking sector in Europe, and the asset quality reviews will indeed do that. They will encourage the banks to do recapitalization and thus move into a stage where they can recover lending to the SMEs and households.
The inflation obviously is now very low in the Eurozone, worryingly low to some people. You've seen the IMF warning of the risk of deflation in the Eurozone. How worried are you about that, and how do you assess the comparisons with Japan?
We have, to my mind, no real risk of deflation, because not least because the European Central Bank and President Draghi have clearly pledged that they stand ready to act in case the situation worsens in this regard. At the same time, we are probably facing a lengthy period of low inflation, and in this regard, I think it's important to take into account that the successful rebalancing of the Eurozone economy will require that the European Central Bank could, by and large, meet its inflation targets, so that the situation would not be asymmetric, but rather symmetric in this regard.
So does low inflation make that rebalancing easier, or doesn't it make it more painful?
A lengthy period of low inflation can make it more difficult if this low inflation is caused by the core Europe inflation being very low.
Yeah.
It's natural that in the periphery, which is now adjusting, say, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, their inflation has to be very low because they are recovering competitiveness, and that's good for their export growth and for their economic growth and employment. But at the same time, in order to succeed in the rebalancing process, the whole Eurozone average inflation should be closer to the 2% target, which the ECB has itself set.
Sure. Let's talk about a couple of countries that are still in programs but trying to find a way out. Greece first. It's still facing a long-term funding gap, even though it's now got a primary surplus for the first time. How can this be handled?
We are handling the financing needs of Greece of this year in the coming weeks and months. Then the second stage will start later on this year once Eurostat has validated the fiscal data of Greece so that we know whether there is a primary fiscal surplus. We know that towards the end of April. Then we'll have another review mission. Then we are in the summer, and then we will deal with the fiscal gaps of 2015 and 16, as well as the issue of debt sustainability.
But with respect, that's all process rather than actual solution.
That's right.
What solution are you working towards?
Let's not jump to the policy conclusions yet. We are working towards a solution that the debt burden of Greece is sustainable, and that Greece, in full ownership of its economic reform program, will be able to restore the foundations of economic growth. In fact, we are seeing signs of the turnaround in the Greek economy now, finally, this year.
Portugal is closer to the exit from its program, but there's still some question mark. Do you think Portugal will be ready to exit its program in May, June, or is it still a bit weak, and what help might it need?
Portugal has done a lot over the last couple of years, both in fiscal policy and in economic reforms. Now, the latest news of the fiscal deficit are encouraging, and we are also seeing that the reforms are moving forward on track in Portugal. The borrowing costs have come down, partly also as a result of the successful exit of Ireland. So in that sense, Portugal has chances of all the chances of a successful conclusion of its program. Whether it makes sense to have, for instance, a precautionary arrangement in that context, it will be seen later on in the course of the first months of this year. I would say during this spring-winter we will need to discuss and decide on this, of course, based on the position of the Portuguese government.
Olli Rehn, thank you very much. It's a tradition that every time you come on Reuters TV, you mention spring-winter, that specially undefined Finnish season.
That's right. I'm a structural optimist, and I'm looking forward towards the spring and summer, and the spring-winter is always a good period.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.